Hi everyone, this is Neil. I hope this finds you well. Apologies if you hear any background noises. I'm with my son this weekend, so you might hear Jonah sort of just a little bit in the background, but he's going to make every effort to be quiet. So, what this video is about, and it's probably going to be about a half-hour one, I would imagine. It might even be a bit longer, so you may want to take it in chunks. It's just an introduction to Module 2, which is the module about linking theory and practice, because as we know, particularly in terms of education, something that seems to be right in theory may often work out very, very differently in practice. And that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at in this particular module. Now, there are 3 sections to the presentation today, and you'll probably find that you want to just like kind of go through the whole presentation to begin with, but then you might want to go back and revisit particular sections. So there's a slide which will look like this at the introduction to each section, and if you just scan through the video you should be able to find the sections quite easily. So in the first section I'm just going to explain the big picture of the module, what it's really all about, why we're doing it, why we think it's important. In the second section, I'm just going to go through some of the details of the module, the learning outcomes and the assessment, so you know exactly what you're up for. All the things that I talk about in that section are already in the PG Cert handbook, so all that information's in the handbook as well. And then in the third section, I wanted to talk a little bit about how really to get the most from this module, because whilst I'm always a bit sceptical of a sort of a simplistic division between content and skills, and I think you teach the two together, there are some skills that and they're going to be really important skills for your ongoing development, and in fact for accelerating your development as teachers, that you need to acquire as part of this module. And the skills element is very much going to be in the blogging. The content element is going to be more in the sessions that we have together. So I just want to get clear about that and explain some of the skills that you're going to be working on developing through the blog. And you're not going to get those in class, for the very simple reason that the skills relate to you doing things in your own teaching, and obviously that's not what we do in the time we spend together. So in the time we spend together, you're going to be introduced to some new theories, but the really important part, as it was for Module 1, but I just want to be very explicit about this, is taking those theories into your classroom, putting them into practice and evaluating what happens, and then learning to articulate that clearly in writing and putting that on the blog. So that's why the blogging, I think, is actually even more important really in Module 2 than it was in Module 1. Okay, so just wanted to flag that to you. It's a significant part of your learning on this module. So first of all, let's have a little think about the big picture of Module 2. Now, going back to Module 1, you remember we had a sort of overall map for the module, which was that the module really hung off this idea of constructive curriculum alignment. And in different sessions, we looked at different elements of this map, didn't we? We looked at, for example, how to write a really good lesson goal, how to write an ILO. We looked at effective ways of giving students feedback. We looked at summative assessment. We looked at formative assessment. So really all the sessions in Module 1 were very much related to this specific overall map. Now, one of the things about that first module is it's designed, and quite often people take it with very limited experience of teaching, it's deliberately designed to be very practical. And I know that, you know, from the feedback that people have given, that people really tend to like that first module, and their teaching tends to change and develop really rapidly through that module because it's very practical, it's very hands-on, it gives you things that you can go away and do. And the journey from what we talk about in class to what you do in your own teaching tends to be relatively short, doesn't it? Because if someone says to you, okay, this is how to write a good learning outcome for a lesson, well, you just then go off and apply that and you write learning outcomes for your own lessons. So there's not sort of a long journey between what you do in class and how you apply it. In Module 2, I personally find Module 2 more interesting. In Module 2, that journey is a bit longer because it's more creative, because what we're going to look at in Module 2 are more fundamental underlying principles and theories of, for example, how people learn. And then there's a sort of slightly longer journey that we all have to go through where we go, okay, that's a really interesting fundamental principle or underlying theory. How might it work for my students? How might I apply it? And we need to be a bit more thoughtful and a bit more creative about how we're going to apply these ideas to our own teaching. Because the chances are, instead of us all applying them in very much the same way, you know, we all go off and we all write learning outcomes in the same way and we use measurable verbs and yada yada, in Module 2, the chances are that we're going to apply what we're learning in a much wider variety of ways, which will speak to the different kinds of teaching and the different kind of context in which we teach. You know, so things like what subjects we teach, whether they're very practical disciplines or whether they're more theoretical disciplines, that really fundamentally changes how you take some of these ideas of the module and bring them into your own teaching, as do things like what your students are ready for. You know, are they younger and less experienced students? Are they more mature and more experienced students? How many students are in the room? It's different if there's 8 from if there's 80. So much wider range of ways in which you can apply these ideas, but I think the module is all the richer for it. However, because I think it was really useful in Module 1 to have an overall map, we're going to have an overall map for Module 2 as well. And I just want to build that map up over the next few slides. So I'd like to introduce you to Neill. This is Neill. He's a Danish writer and thinker about education. I think he's great. We're going to be reading some of his stuff on this module. And he had this basic idea of the 2 different dimensions of learning. And we have actually looked at both of these dimensions in Module 1. It's just we haven't named them in the way in which they're named in this particular model. So if you look at the bottom of the little diagram on the right hand side, one dimension of learning, this is the vertical axis, he suggests is that there's always some kind of an interaction between the individual student and the environment in which they're in. So, you know, this is saying something quite obvious, isn't it? In my classroom, I'm trying to create a kind of environment, a kind of a group environment and a safe environment, and then I'm introducing my students to some new ideas or some new skills or some new techniques. And for each individual in that room, there's some kind of interaction between themselves and what's going on in that learning environment. And if it's a positive interaction, the chances are they're going to learn well and acquire new skills and new knowledge. And if for some reason it's a negative interaction, I don't know if they felt shamed or embarrassed or uncomfortable or whatever, then there's probably not going to be a positive interaction, and then they probably won't learn very effectively. So the first dimension of learning is that there's some kind of interaction always between the individual and the environment. That's also true, by the way, if you're going off and learning by yourself. I find, you know, I mainly learn from either sitting and reading things or watching videos or listening to talks or just having an experience which puzzles me and sitting down and trying to figure it out. Well, in all those different ways, there's been some kind of interaction between myself as the individual and the environment in which I find myself, and my learning results from the interaction between myself and that environment. It very often results, actually, from the interaction, interestingly, being in some way problematic. You know, I discover I can't do something, or I realise I'm lacking knowledge in a particular area and I go away and I seek it, or I realise I'm lacking skills in an area and I go away and I seek it. But for me that's positive, and I'm sure it will be for most of you guys, because we're quite mature, experienced learners. For a lot of younger learners, the minute they encounter a problem, it becomes a way of stopping learning because it freaks them out or it worries them or they think there's something wrong with themselves or they just think they're not very good at doing things. So anyway, there's this kind of interaction. The other axis, which is along the top, the horizontal axis, is he suggests that what the individual is trying to do is acquire something. So there's the process of acquisition, and you know, we're trying to acquire knowledge or skills or understanding or whatever. So part of that is there is this content that we're trying to acquire, and part of that is there's this context of what's my incentive, you know, what's my motivation, am I feeling ready and willing to put the work in to acquire this content. So there's an interaction between, here's the content that someone's trying to help me acquire, but I actually have to participate responsibly in the learning process myself. If a student decides not to participate responsibly in the learning process, you know, if they decide not to do any of the blogs, well, then they're not going to learn anything because they haven't actually engaged in the participation they need to engage in order to activate their own learning. So that was his first idea. The diagrams I'm showing you actually come from more than one of his books. It's quite interesting how this idea evolves for him over time. And then what he realises is you can think of these two axes as sort of mapping out as being the corners of a triangle, and he thinks of this triangle that he's drawn as what he calls the field of learning. These are all the elements that go into this whole thing that we call learning. And for him, the field of learning is like I'm thinking about the left-hand side, the words on the left of this slide. It's like a field of tension, really, between the cognitive, so that's how somebody is thinking, how they're developing, the emotional state of the individual learner, and the social, what's going on in the whole group, and how's the group working together or not working together in order to enable or get in the way of everybody's learning. So you see now that he's slightly unpacked the ends of these different axes. So his idea of content is that might be about knowledge, understanding, or skills. So it's not just learning facts; it's also learning to be able to do something, or learning to like really understand things in a deeper way. On the right hand side at the top, you've got incentive. This is the emotional element. This is to do with people's motivation. Is it intrinsic? Is it their own motivation? Is it extrinsic? Am I trying to motivate you as a teacher? These are issues we're going to look at. People's emotional state as a learner, their sense of confidence, their sense of security, their willingness to take a risk, their willingness to make mistakes and learn from that, and whether that's okay for them or not. And volition. Volition means willingness. Willingness to put the effort in, willingness to do the work. In Module 1, we talked about the cognitive, the affective, and the cognitive. The cognitive is the thinking bit. Well, that's on the left-hand side of the top of this triangle. But the affective is the emotional side. That's on the right-hand side of the top of the triangle. And the conative is the willingness to put the work in and the willingness to act. And that's on the right-hand side of the top of this triangle as well. And then at the bottom of the triangle, we've got the social elements, which is to do with the ways in which people act together, singly, act within a group, the ways in which people are communicating, students communicating with each other within a group, students communicating with us. Are these channels of communication open and free and transparent, or are they muddy in some kind of a way? And the ways in which people do or do not cooperate with each other. So for Illaris, if we're thinking about the whole field of learning and we're trying to help students with their learning, we need to be aware of all the corners of this triangle. We need to be aware of the content and the skills that we're trying to deliver, the top left. We need to be aware of the individual students in the room and their emotions and their motivations and their willingness to act, top right. And we need to be aware of the dynamics of the group, which is at the bottom. We need to be aware of all of these things and balance them. And in my mind, I don't know if this is a helpful image or not, I hope it is, I sort of see this triangle as like a triangle of wood balanced on top of a football, and I'm standing on this triangle, and it's sort of a wobbly triangle that's constantly shifting because it's on top of this football. It's a little bit unstable, and I think of the triangle as a wobble board. And I think that as I try to become increasingly skilled as a teacher, not only do I need to be able to sort of balance on this triangle and not have it fall off in any direction. You know, it's great if I can get on individually with students and I'm good at the content, but if I'm rubbish at dealing with the group and what's going on in the group, I'm going to fall off. The triangle's going to be out of balance. It's going to tip over. So not only do I need to balance it, I also need to develop the skills that, according to what's going on in any individual moment, I might need to pay attention more to one corner than the others, because that corner might be the bit that's needed. You know, I might need to start thinking about what emotions are running in the group because they're getting in the way of people's learning. So I need to learn to balance on the triangle, but also tilt it in certain directions as well. One thing I notice in myself is that if I'm co-teaching with somebody, I'm thinking of a particular person I co-teach with here, not at BIM, this person pays a lot of attention to the social element and the emotional elements, but they don't pay much attention to the cognitive elements. And I've noticed, I didn't realise I was doing it consciously to begin with, that when I teach with her, I tend to lean much more heavily into the cognitive bits and the content bits and the theory bits, because that's where she feels uncomfortable going, because she's not so confident with all the theories and the content. So I realise I need to balance the fact that she's fabulous with the group, she's great at all the motivational stuff, not so good at the content. I need to go heavier on the content in order to balance this. So this is what we're thinking about. We're thinking about individually, and this is what Module 2 is about. Module 2 will help us look at all the different elements of this field of learning and think about how do we maintain awareness of them, which ones are we stronger at, which ones are we less strong at, what do our groups need, and how do we try to bring them into balance, because the optimum conditions for learning are where all of these elements are working together really well. Over time, he keeps on changing and refining the triangle. You'll see he starts labelling the corners with slightly different words. This is the later version of his triangle. And I quite like the way he labels the corners in this one, because it's very simple and straightforward. He talks about the content of the learning, the incentive of the individual student to learn, and the interaction between the student and you and the students and each other. And I'm like, right, I like that. That's very clarifying. I need to think about the content, I need to think about the incentive, and I need to think about the interaction. And then there are educational theories. These are the words now along the sides of the triangle. There are educational theories which link these things together. So the link between the content of what I'm teaching and a student's incentive to do the work is in a part of education called developmental psychology. The link between the content I'm teaching and all the interactive elements is in activity theory, and the link between an individual's incentive and the workings of the whole group is in socialization theory. And so we're going to be looking at each of these areas. The other thing he does, which I quite like, is you'll see inside the triangle, and I don't agree with all of his positioning, but that really doesn't matter. He's named really some of the most important educational theorists that whose ideas we're currently using in the field of education, and he's shown sort of where the centre of gravity of their work lies. Which bits of this triangle does that particular theorist go most heavily towards? Now, sometimes, theorists or people who work in education work on all sorts of different ideas. So we're only talking about the centre of gravity. We're not saying this is the only thing they're interested in. We're saying, yeah, this is very much where they might go. And so to name some people who you might be familiar with already, in that top right-hand corner, I know you'd have encountered some of the work of John Heron already. You'll know little bits, even if you don't know in detail, you know bits about Sigmund Freud. You can see that Heron and Freud are very much about the individual, their emotions, their motivation, what's going on. So that's why he's positioned. That's why Nudie Lewis has positioned their work up there. The way Module 2 works, and then coming back to the idea of the map, is basically we're going to explore the corners and the edges first. And each time we work with you, we'll show you which part of the map we're talking about. And then towards the end of the course, we come into the middle where the star is. So we're going to look at the different elements separately first, and then we're going to think about how they might combine later, which always seems to me to be kind of quite a nice logical way of building it up. And towards the end of the course, although we will refer to some of them a bit earlier on, if you look at that kind of whole little diagonal of names that starts above the star and just to the slightly to the left, 5 names up, we're going to look at Jack Meserov, we're going to look at Stephen Brookfield, we're going to look at Donald Schoen, we're going to look at Chris Argyris. Just jumping under the star, we're going to look at Peter Jarvis and Etienne Wenger, and then we're going to end looking at the work of Bob Keegan. And as you'll know, I've been really privileged because I've done the course at Harvard with Bob, so I'm really familiar with Bob's work, and I think that's a really nice place to end the course, because he's trying to be aware in the way that I think we all try to be aware of. How do I stand in the middle of the triangle and retain awareness of all these different things, because it can feel overwhelming otherwise. So we'll go around the corners, we'll go around the edges, and we'll end up in the middle, and that's how we'll bring it all together. So that's the map of the course, and that's the sense of some of the areas that we're going to be looking at on the course together. And I hope you're going to find it interesting, because I think it's great. So let me just take you through some of the details of the module, and this is all stuff that's in the PG Cert handbook already, as I've told you. So this is Module 2 of the PG Cert. Action Research is Module 3, then that's it. You've done Module 1, you've started in your Action Research, that's Module 3. This is Module 2, Linking Theory and Practice, and that's just the title of the module, Linking Theory and Practice. And here's the description of the module from the handbook, and I just want to unpack it a little bit. I'll read it through first, then I'll unpack it. So it says, this module is designed to deepen and extend participants' knowledge and understanding of the topics introduced in Module 1. There's a greater emphasis on critical engagement with theories and models of teaching, learning and assessment on this module, but its primary concern is to allow participants to explore the complex interrelationships between theory and practice as these manifest in each individual's own teaching practice. We aim to work as a supportive and critical learning community to enable each participant to increase both their theoretical and practical range as teachers and facilitators. There's quite a lot packed into that. It's quite a complex thing, so let me unpack it a bit. So first of all, we are going to deepen and extend things that we've looked at in Module 1. We will return to some of the ideas in Module 1 that we looked at in a very practical sense, and just expand on those now and deepen those and think about some of the underlying theories and reasons why these things work more than just the more hands-on practical way in which we looked at them in Module 1. So there's a theorist to look at called Jerome Bruner, and Bruner has the idea of a spiral curriculum. And in a spiral curriculum, you return to themes that you've already met, but you return to them at a deeper level. And the reason you return to them at a deeper level is that you return to them in a way which brings more theory and underlying thinking to it rather than just the practice. So you start with the practice, which is maybe the more surface level of looking at something, and then you go into the deeper level, which is thinking about theories behind it. There's a greater emphasis on critical engagement with theories. In Module 1, it's very much, and this is what you're invited to do, and this is what most of you wrote in your assignments. I said this in the general feedback about the assignments when I did that little recording for you all. In Module 1, very much what happens is people are introduced to new ideas, good things to do in teaching. They apply them. They say, oh, did it work, did it not work? And then you evaluate yourselves. You say, oh, yes, I think I did that well. Or, oh, I think I missed this and I should have done that instead. That's great. That's where you start. What we're doing in Module 2 is we're now actually bringing that critical engagement, which up till now has mainly been focused on yourselves and how well am I doing and did I apply the theory well. We're bringing the critical engagement to the theories now as well. So instead of just kind of having a theory, not particularly criticising it and going, okay, let's use it to see what happens. Now we're going, okay, let's use it. Let's see what happens. Did I use it effectively? Did I not? That's everything we did in Module 1. And now we're adding a step, which is, right, now that I've used it, what do I think about the theory itself? What do I think about the strengths and weaknesses of this particular theory? That's the new element we're adding in. So that's what it means by saying more emphasis on critical engagement with the theories. We want to look at the theories, but really think about what's my take on this theory in relationship to my own teaching. So as we then say, the primary concern is to allow us to explore the relationships between theory and practice, and they're very complicated relationships between theory and practice, and this is the important bit, as these manifest in each individual's own teaching practice. So this goes back to what I said earlier on. You know, if you encounter a really fundamental underlying theory, it's going to then manifest itself at a surface level differently according to what kind of teaching you're doing. Okay, so we're really inviting you all to explore these ideas in relationship to your specific teaching context, and your context is going to make that exploration different, which again is why sharing that and discussing that on the blog is going to be really, really important, because you get the ideas when we meet, you then individually go away to think about them, but then sharing your experiences and helping each other understand and interpret and explain our experiences to ourselves, that's the work of the blog, and that's absolutely crucial throughout this module, which is why, going on to the next sentence, we're going to try and work in a supportive way, this is the blog, and a critical way, this is giving each other feedback and helping each other see what's going on, helping show each other our blind spots, helping each other kind of understand, God, I tried this, it really didn't work, what went wrong? So, you know, trying to help each other understand that, which will enable us, ultimately, and this is the purpose of the module, to increase both our theoretical range, so in other words, I know more, I have a greater understanding of education, of teaching and learning, why it works, why it doesn't work, and our practical range, I can actually go and do things now in my classroom that I couldn't do before, or I can do things and I can do them more effectively, or I become much more consciously competent. Lots of people at this stage in their teaching are unconsciously competent. You go in, you do things, it works, it's great, you're getting really good results, don't necessarily know accurately why is that working? And if my context were to change, if next year I get double the number of students, what do I need to change so that it's going to carry on working equally as well, rather than people going, oh my God, I could do it with 10, I've got no idea how to do it with 20. That's the difference between conscious and unconscious competence, trying to make you consciously competent and increase the practical range of things that we can do as teachers and as facilitators, helping students with their own learning. So what are we trying to do on this module? Well, it's really about thinking like expert teachers so that we can teach our students as effectively and as well as possible. It's no good learning a range of just hints and tips and practical techniques which may or may not work in different situations. We need to learn the underlying thinking that generates those practical techniques in the first place. So we're going to work together as a group to try and figure out how to do this. There's going to be input and discussion both together and on the blog. People that you're then going to get into action, you're going to try things out, and then you're going to reflect, you're going to think about, well, what worked, what didn't work, what am I going to change next time? And really we're looking for mindsets together which are about growth, they're about our development as teachers and facilitators, getting better at what we do already and increasing the range of what we do, and then being prepared to be a little bit more experimental, try things out and see what happens. In practical terms, the main types of areas we're going to look at, and this fits into Neill Lewis's triangle, his field of learning. Obviously, teaching and learning theory. More emphasis on learning in this module than Module 1. Module 1 very much the emphasis on teaching. Module 2 very much the emphasis on looking at things from students' point of view, or looking at things from our own point of view as learners. Learning, what is learning, how does learning happen. We're going to look at some practical stuff still, of course. It's not just all theoretical. I mean, the module's called Linking Theory and Practice. We need both. So we're going to look at some more advanced teaching skills, assessment skills, facilitation skills. We're going to look at ways of working with groups, group processes, how do groups develop over time, how do we get groups developing in the ways in which we want them to develop, what do we do when they get stuck, what do we do when things seem to be going wrong. We're going to be looking at our own personal and professional development. We're going to be bringing coaching skills in, very important in this module. It's a different way of working with individuals and with groups. We're going to look at some young adult development theory. Most of our students are young adults. We'll look at some later life development theory as well, because we do have mature students, but we're going to look at sort of the developmental stage of many of the students and where they're at, which I find really helpful because it explains to me why some of my students behave in the ways in which they do, and they might be driving me crackers, but then I go, actually, that's developmentally appropriate for a 19-year-old. 19-year-olds do that for a reason, and then instead of just like kicking against what they're doing, I can understand what they're doing and learn to try and work with it. And we're going to look at the psychology of learning, which is a lot of that stuff around emotions and motivation and volition, willingness to get into action. So you'll see that's covering the content area, it's covering the emotional area, and it's covering the area of working with groups. So the module learning outcomes, just to do the kind of the really nitty-gritty bit here. So the module is level 7, which is master's level. It's 20 credits. So each of the 3 modules you do, they're all 20 credits. So we'd be looking at 200 hours of work for this, which of course includes your teaching time. And there are 5 learning outcomes, the first 3 of which go together. So by the end of the course, the successful participant will be able to, number 1, critically evaluate a range of pedagogic models and their application in the classroom. This goes back to what I said. So we're not just going to use the models and apply them, we're then going to evaluate what we think are the strengths and weaknesses and uses of these models in our own context. In part 3 of this presentation, I'm actually going to take you through the skill that we're going to be developing and the process we're going to be developing in order to do that, and we'll be writing about this process a lot on the blogs so that we practice it, because basically it's what you're going to put in your final essay, and we give each other feedback on it. So these first 3 go together. So it's using the model, applying it, and then critically evaluating it. So critically evaluating a range of pedagogic models, that just means models to do with teaching and learning. Second outcome, basically the same thing, critically evaluating models on feedback and assessment. So number 1, critically evaluating teaching and learning models. Number 2, critically evaluating feedback and assessment models. And number 3, critically analysing models to do with creating a good group, an effective group, a positive and effective learning environment in a variety of settings with diverse learners. So in the essay, which I'll show you in a minute, and all 3 of those go into the same essay, we need to write about something to do with teaching and learning, something to do with assessment and feedback, and something to do with having an effective group. And obviously those aren't really watertight categories, are they? We'll often be writing about a situation which involves all of those things together. Which models we used, what we tried, what happened, why we think that was, and now that we've tried it, how helpful and effective do we think those models were in order to help us improve our own teaching. So that's the first sort of package of 3 learning outcomes. It's very practical. Even though we're looking at theories, it's always very practical, as I hope the PG Cert always is. Learning outcome 4, which is a standalone one, is we need to demonstrate a critically reflective understanding of student support, showing awareness of relevant legal frameworks and requirements in post-compulsory education. Now don't forget, this is just an introduction now. We're going to spend obviously time in sessions looking at all of these. When it comes up towards looking at the assignments, we're going to give you lots of help and advice about all of these as assignments. We're going to draft the assignments together on the blog. You're going to give each other feedback. So don't worry if this feels like a lot at the moment. This is just the first time you've seen it. You'll be very familiar with all of this by the time we get to the end of the module, obviously. So this one is about working with an individual student. So that individual student who needed some kind of extra support, whether they needed the support in class or whether they have the support with you one-to-one in tutorials. It can be that they have some particular learning need. So we've had people in the past write about students with dyslexia, with ADHD, students with visual impairment, whatever. Or it could be a student just comes along and they ask you for support in some other way. They might have stage fright, or they might be lacking in confidence, or they might be really worried about their academic work. So any student who you've worked with individually, showing awareness of legal frameworks if there are any. So for example, if a student has a learning need like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, whatever, there are legal requirements on us about what support we offer them. So there is a legal framework that's relevant there. If somebody comes to me and says, oh, I'm just not feeling very confident, there isn't a relevant legal framework there, so we just don't bother about it. And we write about how we identified their issue, what we decided to do to support them, what happened when we did it, what we've learned from that, what worked well, what didn't work well, what might we do differently next time. And that's the critically reflective part at the beginning. Critically reflective there just means, make sure that you make it clear that you had a good reason for what you did, and you were able to really think about and evaluate how effective your support was for that student, and what worked and what didn't and why. So that's a standalone learning outcome. And then the final learning outcome is also standalone. That is, demonstrate a purposeful engagement with quality enhancement processes designed to help improve the student learning experience. So a quality enhancement process is something like having a teaching observation, or getting all the feedback forms in from the students at the end of the year and seeing what they thought about our teaching and what they thought about our module. So any process which is designed to help us improve the quality of what we did. We have to show an engagement with that process. In other words, we have to show that we got the feedback, we did something as a result of it, and we are aware of whether that actually made things better or not. I had an observation, teaching observation from Sue or Jill or from my college. This was the deliberate practice I was given, so I went away. This is what I tried out. Did it work? Did it not work? What am I going to do next? So it's a very straightforward piece of professional reflection, but linked to just showing that you're very clear that whatever you did was actually designed to help the students in some kind of a way. So that's that final one. So how you'll be assessed is very similar to Module 1. There's an essay, there are 3 separate sections. I'm about to show you what the 3 separate sections are now. It's the same length as Module 1, it's 4,000 words in 3 sections. Of course, on the Sussex rules, 4,000 words means it's got to come between 3,600 and 4,400. There is a little difference to the rules from the rules that we've used before. From now on, according to the Sussex rules, quotations do count towards your word limit. I think this is a bit unfortunate, frankly, and it's not what most universities do. However, that is now the Sussex rule. So any quotations you put in your assignment, those words now do count. In assignment 1 they didn't. From now on, and for all future PG Cert assignments, quotations do count. It's very important that we're all aware of that. And as with Module 1, I've got some suggestions for how many words you might want to put in each section, but that's just a suggestion. The only target you have to meet is the overall word count of between 3,600 and 4,400 words, which Sussex calls 4,000 words. So, looking at the assessment, the 3 parts, we'll do the 2 standalone learning outcomes first. So the first one is you write an evaluative, anonymised case study. We mustn't know who the student is, of student support in which you've been involved. So there's one student who you supported in some kind of a way, and there needs to be, you need to include the following steps: demonstrating your ability to identify a student's individual support needs, just being accurate about, well, what support do they really need? Create a plan for working with them. What did you decide to do? Put the plan into action. You need to actually have done it, and evaluate the degree to which the plan was successful. Now, we're going to talk about student support stuff later on in Module 2, but you might want to just, from this point on, if you're working with individual students, just keep notes, private notes, not to be shared with anyone else, anonymous notes of any particular cases in which you've been involved, because one of those might be the one that you decide to write about for your assignment. The second one, and again you can be thinking about this from now when you get your teaching observations, is to write a short critical account of your engagement with a quality enhancement process. So things like end of year BIM course evaluations, teaching observations, discussing and justifying. Now you can do this 2 ways. You can either write it as things you're going to do in the future, or you can write it as things you've done in the past. It doesn't matter, you can do it either way. So discussing and justify the changes you're planning to your course delivery. So you get feedback and you can write an essay saying, well, okay, on the basis of this feedback, this is what I'm planning to do next, and this is what impact, why I'm planning to do it, this is what impact it's intended to have on the student learning experience. The reason that's written in the future tense is because some people do the PG Cert, the graduate students do the PG Cert just in 1 year, and sometimes they literally don't have the time to implement the changes they want to make. So you can write it about, here's the feedback I had, here's what I'm planning to do, and here's why I think it'll work. That's fine. The other version of this, and this is what staff more generally do because you do the course over 2 years, is you write about, I had the feedback, this is what I did and why, this is how well it worked out. So you can also write about it after the event and show what actually happened and whether it actually worked. To my mind, that's actually the easier way of writing it, but it's entirely up to you. And then the third part of the assignment is the one where you look at all the different theories and the critical evaluation of those theories once you've put them into practice. And this is, write an essay in which you make an explicit claim for your achievement of learning outcomes 1 to 3. So you have to say, yes, look, I can apply a model of teaching and learning and critically evaluate it. I can apply a model of assessment and feedback and critically evaluate it. And I can apply models to do with how to make groups work well and critically evaluate them. I've done it. This is me showing you that I've achieved those learning outcomes. And you do it through writing a critical evaluation of a range of educational models and theories in relation to your own practice. So what you can't do is just write about a theory. You've actually got to only write, or you only can write about things that you've actually used and put into practice. So it's very practical. You can't write an essay about, the works of Lev Vygotsky. It doesn't work. You can write an essay about, here's something I learned from Vygotsky, here's something I did in my own teaching, here's what happened and here's why. So it's and that of course is the whole point of linking theory and practice. And your essay must cover all three of the areas. It must cover teaching and learning, it must cover assessment and feedback, and it must cover groups. And that's about 2,500 words. So those three things go together. Reading wise, we're going to use the same two core texts that we've been using so far, so the Biggs and Tang and the Hattie, and we're going to add one, and we're going to provide you with a copy of this, which is Nudiliris, who did the Field of Learning Triangle that we looked at earlier on, has edited a really fantastic book called Contemporary Theories of Learning, Learning Theorists in Their Own Words, and lots of the theorists that are in that triangle have each written a chapter of the book where they talk about what's really important in their educational ideas. And it's a fantastic way of getting a good introduction to the theorists. And then if there are two or three who you find particularly interesting or engaging, or they really resonate with you, or they're fruitful for your own work, then obviously you go off and you explore those particular theorists in more depth. So it's a great introduction, and we will provide you with a copy of all of that on the blog, so you don't need to go away and get that. Final thing to say is that, of course, the X grade still applies. So by the end of the course, as well as passing assignments, you do have to have completed 80% of the blog posts, you do have to have 8 tutorial records on your file, and you do have to have 8 teaching observations on file, which is a combination of both PG Cert observations, observations from your colleges, and peer observations. We're going to be encouraging you to go in and give each other observations and support each other and help each other, and we need to have 8 of those in context, 8 of those in total, no matter where they came from. So that's all the information about the module. And finally, just to talk a little bit about how to get the most from this module. Now, you've seen a version of this slide before, but let's just revisit the idea of, okay, this is master's level education. We know there's a framework for higher education qualifications in the UK, which explains, what should be the sort of the level of different qualifications. So according to that framework and according to what we're doing, what makes it master's level as opposed to undergraduate level or as opposed to doctorate level? What are the category? What's the word I'm looking for? What are the characteristics? Is the word I'm looking for. What are the characteristics of this? So first of all, we are going to be working at the forward edge of developing knowledge in the field. It's not like we now know everything there is to know about education. There are ongoing questions, there's ongoing research and debate. So in this module we will both look at some very fundamental ideas, but we'll also look at things that have emerged in the last couple of years. One of the things that I find fun about teaching Module 2 is it is different every year, because every year I'm keeping up to date and I'm changing the content according to some of the new and interesting ideas that are coming out. So we definitely need to be working at the cutting edge of knowledge. We need to be aware that knowledge from the social sciences, education being a social science, is always developing. We're always learning new things, and it's always contested and provisional. People have different ideas. We know, just even from reading the newspapers, that people have very different ideas about education. There are some very passionate debates in education, which we will encounter some of these ideas, and there's a range of different opinions, and we need to be clear where we lie in some of these debates. So it's contested and it's provisional. We also need to say, well, this is what I think right now, but I'm open to the idea that I'm going to learn more and change my mind. In order to do this, and this is very much the master's thing, you will encounter competing knowledge claims. You'll encounter people who have very different points of view, and you then need to make reasoned judgments for yourself about, for you, which of these competing points of view do you find most compelling and why. So that's a reasoned judgment, and you need to be able to evaluate the people's different ideas. You need to be able to say, well, the strengths of this idea are this and this, as opposed to this idea where the strengths are that and that. So you're making up your own mind, but it's not just making up our own minds on the basis of just our opinion or our instinct. It needs to be reasoned. We need to be able to give reasons and evidence for why we think what we think. This requires us actually to have a more sophisticated understanding in this module of what we mean when we talk about educational models and theories. What is an educational theory? What status does it have? Is it a truth? Is it just an idea? Is it just an opinion? Where does it come from? And most importantly, and this is a characteristic of master's level education, we're now not just trying to be consumers of other people's knowledge. Oh, these people have worked it all out, right, I'll just learn it, okay, now good, I know it as well. We're actually trying to take these ideas, apply them in our own contexts, think about them deeply, and therefore we're becoming producers of knowledge. We're becoming producers of knowledge about our own teaching and the context of our own teaching. And of course you know that most explicitly, and this is where the two modules link together, in the action research module, because in the action research module, because you're doing original research, then you're very much becoming a producer of knowledge on the basis of your own research. But just to return to that question I just asked for a moment, what is a theory anyway? And I think generally theories, you can think of them as having three different dimensions, three different aspects. So one thing a theory might have or achieve is a power to predict. If you think about a scientific theory, Einstein's theory of relativity is a good example of this actually. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, that predicted that there would be certain phenomena that you could observe astrologically. You could observe light bending, for example, during a planetary eclipse. So the theory predicted that would happen. Sometime after the theory was produced, they went away and there was a planetary eclipse and they watched it and they went, oh, lo and behold, we can observe the light bending. So this was a way of actually verifying the accuracy of the theory, because the theory predicted that something would happen. They went away and tried it out, and indeed the thing that had been predicted to happen did happen. So one thing a theory can do, a good theory, is it can predict what it thinks is going to happen. Another thing a theory can do is that it has the power to suggest action. So if the theory says, giving students feedback has a high effect size, that suggests to us that we need to think about how we're going to give our students feedback. The third thing a theory can do is has a certain power to explain what's happened. Something happens in my classroom that confuses me or puzzles me, then I read some educational theory and I think, right, okay, I can now see why I think that happened, because this theory suggests that when I do X, Y is likely to happen. I did do X, Y did happen. Right, I've got a theory now to explain to myself why I think this happened. So I think theories in general, whether they're from science or social science, politics, whatever, generally have these three dimensions: some kind of power to predict what's going to happen, some kind of power to suggest to us what we might want to do, what we ought to do, what's likely to be effective, and some kind of power to help us understand why something has happened. Now, educational theories in general, good educational theories, are both empirically and deductively derived, right? So by that I mean that what educational theories tend to be is they tend to be empirically derived. In other words, they tend to be derived from observing what's happening in the world. If you want a theory about assessment and feedback, what people tend to go and do is they tend to go and look at a lot of assessment and feedback happening, and then inductive reasoning means trying to kind of come to a general theory based on lots of different individual examples. Inductive thinking has two senses, but this is the sense we're using in here. So I go and look at 100 teachers giving their students feedback in class, and I observe which students seem to be making the best progress, and the best progress comes from these 25 teachers. So I then think to myself, okay, somehow these 25 teachers are helping their students more effectively through their feedback than the other 75 are doing. So then I watch those 25 teachers and I go, what is it that I can see they're all doing that the 75 teachers aren't doing? And then when I figure that out, I've then got a theory which would tend to say, right, in order for feedback to be effective, these are the kinds of things you need to do, because I've got lots and lots of different examples, and the ones where it's working the best, this is what I see people doing. So these theories, as I say, tend to be both empirically, from actual observation, and inductively taking lots of different examples and boiling them down, derived. That's where the best educational theories come from. Lots of educational theories, I'm afraid, come from somebody sitting down in their own office and writing an article one wet Tuesday afternoon, and I don't think those theories have any particular value. In fact, I think they're pseudo-theories, they're not proper theories at all. One of the ways in which that then feeds back into the module that we're studying is that means that most educational theories that we're looking at have come from lots of different examples, and then they've been sort of squished and flattened into something which is very generally and broadly applicable. We then need to, as it were, unflatten it or unsquish it and go, okay, that's what tends to happen, but how am I going to make this work in the best sort of way in my own context? Because it's that we've then, as it were, gone back from generalities to something specific again. So most of the theories we look at, you can't just apply them. It's not like learning how to write a good learning outcome and you just apply it. We go, okay, this person's looked at loads and loads of different contexts. This is what tends to be effective in these different contexts, or at least this is what this theorist thinks was effective in those contexts. How might that work for me? Now, when you think about educational theories, basically, I think theories in different intellectual areas work in different ways, right? The power to predict of education theories, I think, is very low. Just because someone tells you it's a good thing to give feedback does not mean that I can just walk into a classroom, give any old feedback, and it's likely to work, right? So I think the power to predict is quite low in educational theories. I think, however, that the power to suggest to us what might be worth trying to do is quite high, and that's where we might say look at John Hattie's effect sizes research. If something's got an effect size of, I don't know, 0.8, 0.9, that's got a high power to suggest to me that if I can figure out how to use that thing well for my students, it's going to be really helpful and it's going to be really effective. And I think it has a medium to high power to help me understand what's happened. The more I read theories in education, the more I can reflect back on teaching situations that had puzzled me or disappointed me, or where I felt I hadn't done very well, and go, if only I'd done this, I would have acted differently. So it has quite a good power to explain what's happened. Okay, so if you want to kind of summarise the work of this module in a little kind of picture, I'd say what we're trying to do is put theory and practice into a dialogue with each other. So we think about theory, and you can imagine it being sort of like a little lens that you look through, and you look through the theory at your practice, and it helps you do three things. It helps us examine our practice. It helps us, good theory this is, helps us plan to improve it. Oh, I've learned something new, right, I'll try something different. And it helps us explain what's just happened and why. So you can use theory as a way of looking at practice, to examine it, plan to improve it, and explain what's just happened. Quite often, that's the only journey that people take in education. Now, I don't think that's very helpful, because I think that somehow privileges theory and suggests that theory is more important than practice. And I don't agree with that, for the very simple reason that, as we just said, if most theories are empirically derived, most theories come from practice in the first place. So then to make them somehow make the theory the most important thing, make it more important than the practical element, seems to me to be daft. Of course, as we know, it's what most universities do, because most universities tend to privilege theory and abstraction over everything that's practical. We know even in schools, certainly in the UK, difficult theoretical subjects like maths and English are seen as somehow of higher status than practical subjects like art or music, or even more practical things like, I don't know, woodwork, metalwork, those are somehow seen as like lower status subjects. Well, that's just a kind of a weird thing we do in our education where we think the theoretical is more important. So I think it's important that we do the reverse conversation as well, where I think about my practice, and then my practice becomes a lens through which I look at theory and go, okay, did that theory actually help me in my own context? So my practice becomes a way of examining theory and evaluating it. And what's really important for Module 2 all the way through is we need the dialogue that goes in both directions. So it's not just from theory to practice, it's also practice going back to evaluate the theory. But that's why this only works when you put the theories into practice that we're talking about. I don't think you can really genuinely have an informed opinion about anyone's theory until you've experienced it and tried it for yourself. So to end, this is the reflective learning process. This is the skill that we're all going to be working on, and that this is very much what we're going to be writing about in the blogs, actually, because this is where we're going to be practicing this skill. And in a way, what I'm showing you now is, beg your pardon, that was my alarm going. What I'm showing you now is almost like the essay plan for the long essay, where you look at the 3 learning outcomes, where you're evaluating the different theories. So, but more practically, it's not just about writing the essay. This to me, if we do this systematically, this is actually how we really get better as teachers. Okay, so and this is how I think I get better as a teacher, as a coach, as a counsellor, as a psychologist. This is my process of learning and helping myself improve. And it's got 6 different stages. It also explains the difference between some of the fancy words that you see in essay titles, which I'll come on to in a moment. So first of all, we encounter a new theory. Most likely you're going to get it in your PG Cert sessions or through your reading. Secondly, I can't just encounter a new theory and think, okay, right, I'll just go and use it. It's not a tool, it's a theory. So I need to think to myself, how might this theory best or most usefully apply to my work? And there's some questions I need to think about that. I might think, okay, what's my best context for application? Say, for example, you learn coaching skills, which you will do on the PG Cert. I might go away and think, okay, where's the most useful place where I could apply these new skills? It might be in one-to-one tutorials. It might be in a classroom setting. It might be in work that I'm doing outside of BIM, working with other people. It might be, oh gosh, I've just learnt really valuable new listening skills. I might go away and use it with my family. So first of all, I need to think about what's the best context to apply the new ideas I've gained from the theory. And then I'd also need to think about, do I need to adapt the theory in any way? If I've got a theory about feedback, and it suggests that feedback ought to be quite challenging, well, that's fine, as long as it's balanced with being supportive. So there's an adaptation. And yes, I can be quite challenging in a room of 6 students where we all trust each other and know each other well. I can't be challenging in the same way in a room of 50 students, because if I challenge someone in a room of 50 students, they're just going to feel put down and humiliated. So then I would need to adapt the theory and think, okay, how can I be supportively challenging in a safe way in a large number of students? So, you don't just apply it, you think about adapting it to your context. So that's the second thing we do. The third thing we do is, obviously, we then act. We've got to go away, try it out, put the theory into practice in our own specific context. The fourth stage, and this is where we now start using some of the educational buzzwords, this is what I mean by critical reflection. So the fourth stage is critical reflection, and we ask ourselves the question, okay, having tried it out, what worked well? What didn't work so well? Were there any surprises? Did I think something was going to happen and something completely different happened instead? And what's my evidence? If I say this worked well, this didn't work well, I need to be very clear about what my evidence is for this, and I need to be clear about the difference between evidence and interpretation. So when I say evidence here, it's literally, if there'd been a video camera sitting in the back of the classroom, what would it have seen? So interpretation would be something like, oh, the students were bored. No, that's already your interpretation of what happened. That's not just direct evidence. The evidence would be the students were talking to each other and fidgeting, right? That's the evidence. But actually, yes, the interpretation might be correct, they were bored, or it might be they didn't really understand what the task was, and so they were asking each other, did you understand that? That's not boredom, that's confusion. So we just need to be really clear about what the evidence is, that what the video camera would have seen to tell me what worked well and what didn't work well. So that's the critical reflection on this is what just happened. if you think about it, of course, what we're going through now is a Kolb cycle, isn't it? We've started with do, we've now gone on to reflect, and reflect is specifically about what did I just do, and now we're going to go into explain, right, which has two parts. So now we do analysis, right? And analysis is trying to explain to myself, okay, I know what happened, I know what worked well, I know what didn't work well, I've got my evidence, so why do I think that happened? Now, in education, and this is of course where we can go back to some of the theories we've been reading, the theories might give us ideas, helpful and useful ideas about why we think something happened. But in education, in classrooms, our classrooms are very messy, complex, multi-dimensional places. Very often, I don't know for certain why something happened in my classroom. There could be several reasons. So what we train ourselves to do here is to go, okay, what's my best hypothesis? What's my number one reason for why I think something happened? But in order to not just be satisfied with the first thing that comes into our head, we also say to ourselves, what's my best alternative hypothesis? If I'm wrong, what might be the other reason? So going back to the example I just gave, my first reason might be, oh, I think my students were a bit bored by that because they didn't see the relevance of the thing that I was teaching them, so I need to establish the relevance with them more strongly. My alternative hypothesis might be, oh, I think I pitched it at too high a level. I think they weren't bored, I think they were confused. I can go away and test those then in future lessons. I can think about, okay, let's start further back. Let's start with something that's simpler and more straightforward. That might be a test of, was I right about whether it was confusion? Or I might go in and I might go, right, I'm going to talk to them about their motivation. And I'm going to say, you tell me why this might be useful for you to learn, and that might be something which tests whether I was right about them being bored because they weren't motivated. So I have to have different ideas in my head and different ideas that I can then go away and test out in order to try and improve something later. I don't know how to improve anything unless I'm really clear about why I think something's gone wrong in the first place. And if I get the wrong reason for why I think something's gone wrong, or conversely, if I get the wrong reason for why I think something's working really well, and I'll definitely do that again, then I'm not in reality going to be able to, sustain things at such a high level or make things any better, because my thinking's not right. And if my thinking's not right, my acting's not going to be right. And the test here is reasonableness. The test isn't, was I right about my hypothesis, because we don't know until we go away and test it again. The test is, does what I'm saying sound reasonable? And that's where we give each other feedback. If you say to me, this worked, this didn't work, this is why I think it is, I might disagree with you, but that doesn't really matter because you were in the room, I wasn't. What matters is, do I think that what you said sounds reasonable? If I think what you said is completely fucking insane, then I would say to you, actually, I'm pretty sure it's not that. What else might it be? If I think, I'm not sure, but that does sound reasonable, then that's the test for your hypothesis. So the analysis stage is, why did something happen? And we always need to have two alternative ideas. Then we get into the evaluation stage, and you remember that evaluation or critical evaluation is what the focus is of the assignments, and this has two parts. So the first part is the part you've already been doing in Module 1, that's the evaluation of yourself. How well did I do? How effectively did I use the theory to inform my actions? And then part B is the bit that we haven't been doing so much of so far, which is the evaluation of the theory. Now that I've used it, what do I think about the theory itself? And I always think about that first overall. What do I think might be the strengths and weaknesses of the theory overall? And then I think about it specifically for my own use and my own context. So contextually, how relevant do I think the theory turned out to be for my context? And in order to use it really well in my context, what improvements or adaptations or changes might I need to make to it? So really, we're now at the bottom of the Kolb cycle, and then finally we're going to go into the final stage, the planning stage of the Kolb cycle. Next steps, practical, right? What have I learned from all of this? What can I do next time round to improve my teaching, improve my actions? But also remembering to think to myself always, and how can I test out my hypothesis? If I'm trying to improve something, I need to remember I've identified through that evaluation stage and the analysis stage, particularly, I've identified why I think something happened. So I need to make sure that what I change next time is linked to why I think something happened, so that not only can I try and make an improvement, I can have a bit of a way of looking at, do I think my thinking was correct or not? So awful lot there. just for an introduction. Don't worry if you haven't taken all that in first time round. You're not expected to have taken that in all first time round. This is probably a video that's worth going back to a few times, actually, at least I hope it is. But that's an introduction to Module 2. I hope giving you a sense of why we're studying these things, why this I think is really important to help us all with our development, our ongoing development as teachers, why it's a bit of a step up from the practicalities of Module 1, a bit of a sense of what the field of learning is that we're going to be looking at through this module, thinking about the stuff we're teaching, thinking about the individual student and their emotional state and their motivational state and their ability and willingness to act, and thinking about all the interactions that are going on with the group, with ourselves and with our students, standing on the wobble board of that field of learning, and recognising that what we're trying to do now is become ever more critical and analytical, not just for the sake of being clever, but because that analysis and that evaluation, as I hope I've just demonstrated in this final section, is what leads us to constantly experiment and improve and test out our thinking about teaching and our ability to act well as teachers. And that goes back to the heart of this module. We're trying to increase our theoretical range, trying to think like expert teachers, and trying to become ever more skilled and increase our range of practices as teachers. So there's an awful lot to get from this module. It's going to require a lot of thinking. It will make your brains hurt. It's meant to make your brains hurt. It'll be getting you experimenting in your classrooms. And the way to get the most out of this individually is for everyone to be taking the ideas from the sessions, trying them out, experimenting with them, going around this reflective thing of going, what worked, what didn't work, why was that, right, what am I going to do next time, how can I make things better, how can I see whether my thinking's right. That's an individual task. And as a group, sharing that experience with each other, sharing our thinking, putting it out there, and getting feedback on the test of reasonableness. People going, oh, did you think it might be this? Or I'm not sure you're right about this, it could be this instead. And the more we do that with each other in a way which is supportive and loving and challenging, the more we all stand to really accelerate our development. So that's going to be the purpose of the blogging from this point forwards. Right. I don't know when I'm going to see you all next, but I look forward to seeing you whenever I do.